Today is Tuesday, October the 9th, 2018. The location is the Yankee Air Museum in Belleville, Michigan. The time is 11 a.m. The person being interviewed is Wayne Lesher. Wayne served in the United States Army Air Force during World War II. The interview will be conducted by Dan Mihal. Also present at this interview will be the videographer, Gary Delisle. This interview is being conducted on behalf of the Oral History Project at the Yankee Air Museum in Belleville, Michigan. How are you today, Wayne?
I'm just fine.
That's good. When were you born, Wayne?
I was born on August 6, 1923.
And where were you born?
In Hillsdale, Michigan.
Where were your parents born?
Let me look and see. No, I am not sure.
That's okay. And do you know when they were married?
No.
Okay, that's fine. Did your father serve in the armed forces?
No, his eyesight was bad.
Okay. And what did your father do for a living?
He was a civil engineer.
Okay. Who did he work for?
Mostly for the State Highway Department, Michigan State Highway Department.
Did your mother work outside the home?
The only time she did was during the war years, where she got a job in one of the war plants.
One of the defense plants?
Lansing, Michigan.
Okay. Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I had two sisters.
What were their names?
Marjorie was an older sister by 2 years, and Audrey was a younger sister by 7 years.
Okay. So you were the oldest?
I was in the middle.
Oh, in the middle, okay. Where did you attend school?
Well, I attended all my schools at East Lansing, Michigan.
When did you graduate from high school?
In 1941.
What did you do after high school?
Well, I went to college at Michigan State, at the old MAC, Michigan Agricultural College, then.
Okay. How long did you go to college there?
Well, I was there for 1 year and a term, and then I enlisted in the service.
Do you remember where you were and what you were doing when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
No. Never heard of Pearl Harbor, like many others.
Okay. Did you enlist after Pearl Harbor?
Yes.
Do you remember where you went to boot camp?
Well, the first camp I went to, I signed up for, actually it was the reserves. So I stayed in college for a while until I was called to active duty. And at that point I went to Scottsdale, Illinois. And but that was just waiting for an opening somewhere. And then I guess the so-called, you call it boot camp or basic training was at Atlantic City. And
okay.
that was the Army Airforce.
So you enlisted in the Air Force?
Yes.
Okay. Did you take flight training then?
Well, later when we went to the college training detachment, I went to Akron University, and there we had 10 hours of Piper Club training.
Okay.
Well, we had ground school, of course, too.
Right.
What was interesting about that is that one of our teachers was a female. She was a female test pilot.
Wow.
Which back in those days was somewhat unusual.
Did you use a link trainer then for ground school?
No, not at that point. We
Okay.
didn't have it. Well, I ended up being a navigator, so
right.
We weren't required on the link trainer. But I did later just for fun.
Okay. Because I just interviewed a woman that was a link trainer operator, and she ran the link trainer for the Navy for pilots.
Oh.
So did you want to be a navigator, or did you try to be a pilot?
I signed up for pilot training to begin with, and that it was interesting. They would post on the bulletin board. We took examinations, and they'd post if we passed our exam. Well, my name came up on the bulletin board, so I met before this committee. The committee was a bombardier, navigator, and a pilot commissioned. And they explained the reason they called me in was that I scored I had asked for pilot training as a preference, but I scored so high on the bombardiering part that they wanted me to change my preference and take bombardiering. And although they said that I passed all of it so I could have my choice, well, I asked if I could be excused, and they excused me. And at that time, the Memphis Belle was making a bond selling tour in the United States. Well, I knew the navigator, who was from East Lansing, Charles Layton, and in high school, he was ahead of me, but he was a good athlete and just a good guy, and he's sort of the person, the senior I looked up to. And I thought, if being a navigator was good enough for Charles Layton, it was good enough for me. So I walked in and said, I'd like to be a navigator. So that's why I'm a navigator.
Okay. Well, so this was 1943 when this happened?
That would have been 43, yes, sir.
Because that's when the Memphis Belle came back. So what happened next to you after you volunteered to be a navigator?
Well, then the training in navigation started. And the primary training for that was in Elgin Field, outside of Houston, Texas.
Okay.
And I had both the, I guess, primary and secondary training right there at Ellington.
Okay. Then what happened after that? Did you?
Well, we got together as a crew in Lincoln, Nebraska, and assigned to B-17s. And there the crew made up. We didn't know one another at the time. And we went to Ardmore, Oklahoma, where we had the combat training as a crew.
Okay. That was the Overseas Training Unit?
Pardon me?
Overseas Training Unit? That's.
Yeah, essentially that's what that was.
Okay. Were you concerned, were you and the crew concerned about being assigned to a B-24 as opposed to a B-17? Was there any discussion about that?
No, at that point, no.
Okay.
No.
So tell me about the beginning of your overseas trip when you flew from there to New Hampshire.
Yeah, and then to Newfoundland.
Right.
And that was, I guess that was the northern route. Some people went the southern route through South America and across. Right. And we went from Gander, which is kind of a famous airfield now because of 9/11.
Right.
So it was very active in Newfoundland. But we flew to the Azores then. And that was, I think as a navigator, we went through 2 fronts. And of course the meteorological, what they told us didn't hold up at all. And that was quite a trip.
Okay. When you were in Gander, did you get any fishing in?
Oh yeah, I like to fish real well. And there I learned something. They had a canoe on this lake, and so, well, I cut open the they had on our parachute harnesses, they had survival things.
Okay.
And I knew they had fishing tackle in that. So I opened that up and got a hold of some line and some flies, but no pole. So I cut a sapling and used that as a pole. And then I got in the canoe, and I would stand up in the canoe and fly cast. And I floated with the wind blowing. And this is where I learned a lesson. You never do that. You always, on a stream, you always go upstream first so you can always get back. Well, I got to the end of the lake and the wind had picked up. And I had one heck of a time getting back to where, well, the shore was all rocks.
Okay.
So I couldn't land on the shore and walk. I had to paddle, and I learned a lesson. Don't go with the wind, go up, paddle upstream, then you can always get back with the wind blowing you.
Did you catch any fish?
Oh yes. they're trout, but I
Okay.
can't remember if they're brown. I don't remember what kind.
It's okay. Now you talked a little bit about the trip to the Azores, and the weather. You talk about how you navigated because you probably couldn't see the stars or the sun to navigate.
No. And of course we flew as individual planes, not in formation. Well, we couldn't go in through that terrible weather. And so I couldn't take observations on the stars, of course. Then when daylight came, why, then the sun came out. Well, that's not the best thing to take. You can get a position at noon from the sun, but I could get lines of position from the sun, but they aren't very accurate. So what I did was I took observations on the sun, and then for drift, I took readings on the waves, which again, that's not very accurate because the altitude we were at is different than what the wave action is. But it was good enough to get to the Azores anyway.
Well, the Azores were not a very big target to hit, were they?
No. In fact, I heard that there were 2 planes in our group that flew over that never made it. You know, they just went down. But then the Germans had a boat or submarine or something that would give false radio signals out, and that would mess up some people, and possibly that's what happened to them. I don't know.
But it didn't happen to you.
It didn't happen to us.
Okay. And then from the Azores, where did you go?
Well, we went to, well, we headed towards Italy, through Marrakech and Tunisia and up into Italy.
Do you have any memories of Marrakech, the accommodations? And
Well, the only thing I remember is they have scorpions there. And the other thing was that I didn't realize this, but pilots would, is that it was really warm, really hot. And so you have a little more difficulty in landing a plane. And I'm not sure if we made the landing the first round around or if it took a couple tries to land. But this was pilots' problem.
Were you, how long of the trip, how long was the trip from Gander to the Azores? How long did it take?
Oh, well, no, that's just one day.
Yeah, but was it a long flight?
Oh, the time.
Yeah.
I don't recall.
Okay.
I imagine for a B-17 it was stretching it.
Okay. Were you guys heavily loaded? Were you carrying a lot of supplies and things?
Yeah, we did carry supplies, and I don't know, whenever we got to where we were going, why that the supplies disappeared, and I don't know what they were.
Okay. And where did you go from Marrakesh next?
Well, we went, spent overnight in Tunisia, in Tunis. We could see war damage there that the ground fighting had caused. But then we went across the Mediterranean well, as a navigator, of course, I took advantage of that. And like when we were flying from Lincoln to New Hampshire, we detoured, the navigator detoured over the Niagara Falls. And then also we detoured over, what was it, Mount Vesuvius in
Italy?
In Sicily.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we detoured so we could take a look.
How long of a flight across the Mediterranean was that?
I don't recall. Okay. It was basically a short flight, because there was the B-24s that bombed Palestine, but they bombed out of Africa.
Right.
Of course, so that it couldn't have been. It was a long distance from North Africa to the oil fields even for the 24s, but it wasn't all that for an airplane across the Mediterranean in that route.
Now you said when you were in Tunis you could see the effects of the war. Could you describe what you saw?
Well, we stayed in a hotel that had been shot out pretty bad, and there were buildings damaged pretty much. That was our first real look at war, really, as observers.
Did you see any Axis prisoners of war in Tunis, like Italians or Germans?
No,
Okay.
no, nope.
Now, when you got to Italy and you landed, you found out about Mission 263 and the 20th. Can you talk about that?
Well, that was our introduction to war, and it's not a good introduction. And no, the day we landed, everybody acted kind of peculiar, but we didn't know how you're supposed to act, you know. But then we found out that our losses had been pretty heavy, especially I was in the 20th Bombardment Squadron, the 2nd Bombardment Group, which incidentally is still in existence. And they have done bombing during the war. We have, I think it's Barksdale, is it out of Louisiana?
Yes, I believe so.
The B-52.
Right.
There's still the 20th Bombardment Squadron. Well, this is what we were assigned to, and we moved into a tent where the officers had 4 men to a tent. The enlisted men had 8 men to a tent, same size tent. But when you went on a mission, you tended to leave your personal effects on your cot, and well, your billfold and things like pictures, maybe anything real personal. So we go into this tent, and of course, here's 4 of these cots that had personal effects on them, and of course, we didn't mess with those. And then it was an eerie feeling, though, sleeping in a cot where people didn't come back. You didn't know if they were prisoners or if they were dead.
Yeah.
You know, so it's you awaken in a hurry to what war is about. And you know, we flew 7 planes to the squadron at that time. So there were 70 men in our squadron that disappeared that day.
So the entire squadron was shot down?
The entire squadron got shot down. That was not Flak. That was enemy fighters, the German fighter planes.
Can you talk about the accommodations, what your quarters were like? And
well, I actually brought a picture. Is that, you want to see the picture?
No, not right now.
Okay, I don't know how you can work that. But it just shows me standing at the door. Well, we were fortunate enough that everybody had a tent, but you fixed them up to whatever you wanted to do. You didn't have a bunch of other people doing the work. You did it. Well, this was already done for us. Our tent was there, and we had a wooden floor. They'd taken, well, I put bomb crates and so forth to get the wood off of those. So we had a wooden floor. We even had a stove. And but later on, we rebuilt the stove, though. But it was rather crude. And of course, as winter came, why, it was cold. And I think we had 1 light bulb.
Okay.
Light bulbs were scarce to get, but we had 1, so we used candles a lot during the read by and so forth.
Was the stove used to heat the tent?
Yeah.
Okay. What was the fuel that you used?
It was the only thing we could get was high octane gasoline. We couldn't get the truck gasoline, that was scarce, but the aviation gasoline was plenty. So that's what we used, and that would ignite real easy.
It sounds like that would be dangerous to ignite the gasoline.
Yes. Well, it didn't happen frequently, but once in a while, a tent would burn down.
Oh, jeez.
I remember the one time a tent was going up, and we all went out and we had 45s, and we're shooting our 45s in the air. Big celebration, somebody's losing everything.
What was the grounds like at the base?
Well, where we were was an olive tree orchard. And I assumed they had removed some of the trees to make room for the tents and things. But there were still a lot of trees left.
Okay.
So, and it was flat.
Okay.
Where we were.
Was there grass, or was it just dirt, or?
Well, I remember mud. And well, in the wintertime it was snow, but yeah, they had a lot of rain and it was pretty muddy.
Okay.
Really.
Did that affect the runways at all? What were the runways made of?
Well, they had the steel matting.
Marston mat? Marston mat?
Yeah, yeah, that's what most of the airfields had that.
Now your crew flew over a brand new B-17. What happened when you got to Italy? They took it away from you?
They took it away from us immediately. Well, of course, they had lost a bunch of planes, so they had to have replacements. And we got a hold of that one. I think it's in that book, Bloody Skies, old flak holes.
Yes.
And I guess, that was the name we called it because it had so many patches in it from flak.
I think the name was flak bait, wasn't it?
The flak?
Flak bait?
No, we call it flak holes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Do you remember your first mission?
Yes.
And where you went?
That's the one mission I remember the whole thing, my one story of the whole mission. We bombed Genoa, Italy, which is in northern Italy. We bombed submarine pens. Now, on the first 2 or 3 missions, what they would do is have an experienced pilot fly as first pilot. Then our pilot would fly as co-pilot, and the co-pilot would fly with some other plane. And they also took one of the gunners off from our plane and replaced it with an experienced gunner, and which worked out fine because now we lost our oxygen. I think we bombed maybe around 26,000 feet somewhere. Now, most of our problem was flak, not enemy fighters. Occasionally enemy fighters, but we controlled the air at that time.
Okay.
And so our nemesis was mostly flak. Well, there was flak. We lost our oxygen. I think we had both a right and left system oxygen. So if one system was out, you plugged it into the other system. But in this case, both systems were knocked out. Now, whether it was flak or just bad luck, I don't know what, but over the target, we lost our oxygen. So an experienced pilot knew what to do. You can't breathe unless you get to lower altitude.
Right.
So into a dive we go. Well, that was as a passenger in a plane, that's quite a thrill. And we got down to lower altitude though. The experienced pilot knew what to do. Probably our pilot would have known too, but he might have hesitated a little while too long. And then, so now we were a straggler. And this is what the German fighters, not controlling the air, but they like to pick on stragglers. So we were vulnerable. And so as we fly, of course as a navigator, and I have to change in a hurry, instead of following the pilot, where have we been, I have to say, this is where we're going to go.
Right.
So I get busy in a hurry. And well, I get the course and everything at lower altitude alone. And suddenly there's 2 fighter planes headed towards us. Oh. And one of the gunners said, should I shoot him, should I shoot him? And the pilot, experienced, said, no, hold your fire. Well, there was an unwritten rule, I guess, or maybe it's written, that they give you a broad view of your airplane. So they would generally pull up then, so you get the broadside, then you can identify it, but head on, they looked like FW-190s, Fokker 190. But it turned out, what were the P-40s? They're our plane, but they didn't, it was right at the last minute they pulled up and they identified. So now an inexperienced crew that we had, if somebody hadn't have said, hey, hold your fire, we might have been shooting at our own plane.
Mm.
But they escorted us back then until we got to safe territory, then they left us. But that was the only time in 35 missions that we were ever escorted back. I tried to count the number of times that I was in a plane that came back as a straggler, and I can come up with 6 times, but maybe there were more than that. I don't know, because I didn't keep records of that.
Okay. Now you said you bombed at 26,000 feet and you had to be on oxygen. Can you describe the equipment that you had to put on? All the equipment, like the flak vest and everything?
Oh gosh. Yeah, of course. Well, we had, the pilot and co-pilot had backpacks. Everybody had chest suits, chutes. So we wore the harnesses. We didn't hook on the parachute until we needed to. Except people like me, I hear stories, and I used to hook one side of it on. And I heard about, getting blown out of the plane and stuff. And well, if you're floating down and don't have a chute, well, I figured I'd have a chute with me, and all I have to do is hook up the other side. So we had, but everybody had the parachute harness anyway, and a chest chute nearby. And then we had heated suits, and then over that, I can't remember everything we wore, but over the target, of course, we'd put on the flak vests. Those were heavy. They were hard to get on. In fact, our tail gunner was killed. That was interesting in a way. Like one time, we landed at a British airfield, it was, I think, and we were shot up pretty bad. And some of the British soldiers were counting the holes in our airplane. And I know that might be in that book, Bloody Skies. But anyway, the guy I talked to said, there are 200 holes in this bloody plane. Wow. And not a one hit us. But another time, there was just one flak hole in the plane, and it killed our tail gunner. It's one of those odd things that, it only takes one.
Right.
But here you got 200, and nobody gets hit. And one killed somebody. Oh, and I was going to mention that the tail gunner I was not there. I don't know, but I was told about it, that I don't think he had his flak vest on, but he was shot in the back and it came out his front. So maybe I'm not sure if the flak vest would have saved him or not.
Okay. Now, a little bit later, after your first mission, you had a mission to Debrecen, Hungary, and you encountered a lot of flak on that mission as well, and you were a straggler, I believe, on that mission as well.
Yeah, I think that was one of them. Well, as I recall, that's one. Most of them I don't recall. I think they only had 37 guns, something like that, fewer than Vienna or some of those other targets, and but they were good shots, and they seemed to hit everybody, and yeah, everybody got shot up pretty bad that day, and that's mostly all I remember about that.
You talk a lot about flak. Can you describe the flak? The Germans used different color smoke for the different kinds of guns?
Well, yeah, I don't know that much about. Let's see, the 88s were the primary gun, 88 millimeter. But that was the same gun. That was the best gun probably in World War II, and that was used on their tanks. It was used on their field artillery and used as anti-aircraft fire. But when their shells exploded, they were black. And then The next biggest, oh, I'm not sure. What was it, like 100 millimeter?
105?
Maybe that was it, 100, something like that. I think they were gray colored smoke. But then the big one was like 124 millimeters, something like that.
Right.
I think they were a white smoke. That was scary. You saw that, you know, that was the big stuff. Oh, flak is one thing interesting about that. Well, it's like shrapnel on the ground.
Right.
In the air, we call it flak. Same thing. A shell bursts and all the little pieces go flying all over. Well, some of them, of course, fly up in the air. Well, then, when they're up in the air, they fall. Well, if your airspeed is 200 miles an hour, well, you hit one of those. It's not the velocity of the flak, it's the velocity of the airplane. And this, I think, hit our pilot one time. That was a big piece, about 3 inches long or so. And but I think that was spent flak that had gone up in the air and it was just falling, and we ran into it. And it went through the windshield and hit him on the arm. And I think it broke his arm. But if it had been from the shell explosion, it would have taken his arm right off.
Okay.
You know. But that's something nobody talked about or they even think about, but there was a lot of this stuff just floating around in the air that we ran into. Of course, the real bad was the explosion from the shell,
right,
and all that power behind it.
And the airplane didn't, the skin of the airplane didn't stop the shrapnel at all, did it?
Nope. I don't think they stopped the cold air either.
Now, the mission where you had to land at the British airfield was a refinery to Burgius. Am I pronouncing that anywhere near?
Brooks.
B-R-U-X?
Yeah, we go to Brooks. Yeah.
So you ended up landing at a British airfield at Rimini?
Yeah, I guess that was it.
Okay. So you had you ran out of gas, basically, right? On that mission? You had a punctured fuel tank?
Yeah, we were short of fuel, I remember that.
Okay.
I think, well, did it run out?
Keep going.
Oh, you know, this gets into that I don't remember.
Okay.
I remember parts of things.
Okay.
Like the only full mission I remember is that first one, and after that, I know parts.
Okay. Do you ever remember seeing other U.S. bombers that weren't part of your group, like maybe from the 8th Air Force?
No, I saw them from the 15th.
Right.
And unfortunately, some of them I felt sorry for, I shouldn't say this, were B-24s.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, they couldn't quite reach the altitude we could with a bomb load. And so they were always below us. And they'd get shot up pretty bad. And they're the only ones I ever saw a plane explode. I never saw a B-17 explode. I've seen them on fire, but not explode. But looking down, with the B-24, I felt sorry that, you know, boom, and you're gone.
Yeah.
That.
So did you actually see B-24s from the 8th Air Force at one time?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Well, because in Italy, primarily they have more B-24s than B-17s. Then in England, of course, more 17s than 24s.
Right. Do you remember anything about a German outfit that was dubbed the Rosarias Flying Circus?
No, I never.
Do you remember when you started rotating through other crews as an experienced crewman? I mean, how many missions in roughly?
I went to two second bombardment group reunions. Pilots would come up to me and said, "Oh, you were my navigator on some mission." I didn't know what they were talking about. And then this went on, and I started getting calls. Like I got a call from somebody in Texas that said, "I flew with his brother." Well, I couldn't remember he was a gunner. I didn't remember. His brother was dead then, and he wanted to know something about it. And anyway, he pointed me towards computers. Said, you can get all this information about who you flew with on computers. So I bought a computer anyway, and he showed me long distance from Texas how to get into the 2nd Bombardment Group. And sure enough, from that I learned that I flew 35 missions, 35 times over the target. And I flew with 16 different crews. No wonder I didn't know people.
Yeah.
And I only flew 10 missions with my own crew. So I flew 25 missions with other crews.
Wow, okay.
And those other crews were 16 different ones.
Now you say you flew 35 missions. Was there ever any discussion amongst the 15th Air Force crews about the difference in the number of missions between the 8th Air Force and the 15th?
Basically, there wasn't any difference.
Okay.
Well, the 8th Air Force started out with no missions, and then they learned that morale got kind of low when they figured the guys would never survive, so they put a limit of 25 missions. And then as times got better, and when we were over in Italy then, times were better, but what they did there, when we arrived there, they said 50 missions. However, some missions counted double.
Okay.
In other words, it would have been possible to fly 25 times over the target, but that was 50. If they all double, that was 50 missions.
Okay.
Well, what happened, in the book you read, McGuire talks about, and I tried to tell Mac, you didn't fly 50 missions. Yes, I did. He'd lost all his records and everything. He said, I got a certificate from the President of the United States that said I flew 50 missions. Well, actually, I counted them. Well, this was after Mac had died. I counted them, and he actually flew 30.
Okay.
30 of they changed then about the time he was the first one through flying. I would have been if I hadn't been wounded, because I was flying with everybody. But when he left, it was 50 missions, and he had his 50 missions, even though means 20 of them he flew were double missions,
Right.
double
Okay.
count. Well, they changed that then and said, you have to fly just 35 times over the target. So
Okay.
that was 35 missions. And I think they did the same thing in England. But I've heard this, whether it's true or not, it probably isn't, but I've heard what they did, that things weren't as bad when we were over there, so they increased the number of missions, but they based it upon a 50% survival rate, or a casualty rate. That, so at 25 missions, they figured, well, that was, well, they had the fighter planes, German fighter planes. When we were there, it was only once in a while the fighter planes came at you.
Did you ever encounter the Tuskegee Airmen?
Yes. I remember just once that they flew, I could see them. They could actually see them, but other than that, they were way off in the distance.
Okay.
Now, however, I encountered one in Rome one time, and we had a couple of drinks, and he was a college man, a real good person, got along fine. And we didn't talk about the war, I don't think. But
Now, you were wounded on November the 19th on a mission to Winterhoven. And do you remember who you flew with on that mission?
yeah,
Okay. It wasn't your normal crew, was it?
no, it was one of these ones that, it was the only time I ever flew with that crew, that one time.
Now your plane was shot up pretty bad, wasn't it, on that mission that you were wounded on?
Yeah, these are things I can't remember because we were shot up so bad so many times. At least.
Did you ever end up flying on the plane that you brought over from the United States again?
Yeah, but I can't remember it. I remember
Okay.
old Flak holes. We flew in it a couple times, and
After you were wounded, how long were you laid up in the hospital? And
well, I think I was 3 weeks. Now this was a field hospital. They had room for 4 officers, and then they had 2 rooms, I think, or maybe just one big room for eight enlisted men.
okay,
And it was not near any American line. In fact, it was New Zealanders who were all around
okay,
the. But it was a nice building. It wasn't a tent.
okay,
It was a old school building that was really a nice, clean place. Oh, something a little interesting. When I got so I could walk around, this nurse was mixing. What was it? Oh Lord. She was mixing blood with something else anyway. And so I asked her what that was, and she said, "I'll tell you if you won't tell anybody." Well, what it was, oh gosh, I can't remember. There was kind of a disease going around that people weren't sure what it was or how to treat it. So they figured anyway that she was giving them, actually they were drinking blood.
oh, jeez,
She was mixing, whatever it was, the mix, but she was mixing the blood with this mix that they were drinking. And this is why she didn't want me to tell them. Well, at that time it was a new enough, it was some, it wasn't combat related. It was some kind of disease that was going around, and
okay,
they got a couple of enlisted men, I guess, that had that disease, and they didn't know how to treat it.
okay.
So I never told
So
them
they
they
were
were
just
drinking
trying to
blood.
they were just experimenting to try to treat
It
it?
was basically an experiment. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any memories of the Battle of the Bulge and talking about, flying to support the U.S. troops?
No, never. I say that in a I don't remember. Well, we got, what was the Yank magazine?
Yes.
That this is where our information would come from. Well,
Okay.
but we had enough problems of our own without listening to other people's problems.
Did you fly again after you were wounded?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I finished up 35 missions then.
So how many missions did you fly after you were wounded? Was it about halfway through your tour, or?
Oh man, I don't even remember that.
Okay.
Yeah, or maybe I was a little more than halfway through.
Do you remember when you were rotated home?
Oh yeah.
When was that?
Oh gosh, date-wise I can't remember. Maybe it was April. I think it was, they asked me if I wanted to fly back. The war was still on
Right.
when I finished mission. They asked me if I wanted to fly back or go by boat. I said, I want to go by boat. I don't want to go
You had
any
enough
more
flying?
airplane. Which maybe that wasn't wise though, because the war was still on, and it was fast enough boat though, and it wasn't a convoy, and they spotted anyway submarine, and so we had to outrun the submarine. So, oh, and I think that was awful close to when Roosevelt passed away,
Okay.
and I'm not sure if we were on the ship when that happened.
Okay. So it was one of those luxury liners that really had
Yeah.
that had a lot of speed. What did you do for the rest of the war after you came back home?
Well, I finished my schooling.
Okay.
Then.
Well, did you stay in the military after you got back
No,
home?
well, we had to as an officer. You're in the reserve,
Okay.
but I don't know, for a number of years.
Okay, but you didn't.
I wasn't active.
Okay.
In the reserves.
Did the Air Force try to talk you into staying in the Air Force after the war?
No.
So when were you mustered out? Do you remember, from active duty?
Oh yeah. It was December of '45.
Okay.
But I was still in the reserve though for a number of years.
Did you retire from the reserves, or?
No, I was kicked out. Well, basically, yeah. You know, I got a letter said you didn't do anything, so goodbye. It was official though.
Okay.
And thanks, Andrew, is that's one of the things that Andrew picked up for me is the separation papers from the reserves, so it was official.
Were your records lost in the fire in St. Louis?
No.
Okay.
No.
'Cause
I don't think so, because I don't know if I've ever gotten any records from them. I've got plenty of records.
I think your last name was in the block of records that were burnt.
It was about half. Yeah. Well, it could have been. I never contacted them. I don't know.
My father's records were lost. He was in the Air Force too. So, but his records were in that fire. After the war, what did you do?
Well, I went back to college and finished my bachelor's degree.
And where did you work after that then?
I went to the Wayne County Road Commission.
Okay, just like your father.
Yep, except he was the state highway, and that was really a good job at that time. And I remember the road from, well, I lived in Wayne, quite nearby, and of course they had built the highway from Detroit to Willow Run at that time. They finally put in one stoplight in between there, and well, yeah, I could tell Willow Run stories too.
Did you get married?
Yes.
To whom and when did you get married? Do you remember?
Oh boy. Oh, well, I was a cadet in Houston, Texas. I fell in love. And I can tell part of that story.
Sure.
It's a whole book, so I'll just part of it. Is that she's a real pretty girl, and anyway, after I became an officer, I didn't get orders. Everybody going, I didn't get orders. I don't know why, but I was an officer, so I could live off base. Well, I moved in with her family. They had a spare bedroom, and so my girlfriend, well, she had a sister, and her mother and father and sister and herself, that they had a spare bedroom. So I moved in there for, I don't know, maybe it was only a week. And then I'd just check in at the base to see if orders had come in. During then I was, but anyway, she moved out. Then when I was overseas, she moved to California, Los Angeles, as a starlet in a movie studio. And so I got, anyway, we corresponded, and then anyway, when I got sent to Santa Ana when I got back from overseas. Well, first to Great Lakes somewhere, whatever, Fort Sheridan, maybe it was, near Chicago. And that was a reception center for people coming back from overseas.
Right.
And now the war was still on even at that point. And I was sent to Santa Ana for recuperation. And that was near, well, no, it wasn't near. It took 4 hours to get up to Los Angeles to where my girlfriend lived. So I think it was maybe the second or third trip up to see her. She said she didn't want to see me anymore. So anyway, so I didn't see her for, well, until I finished college. And after I finished college, well, that had to be like 3 or 4 years later. When I was living in Wayne then, you didn't have to study anymore, just working 8 hours a day. So I wrote her a letter. She wrote back, and then I finally went out by train to see her. That's another story of snowbound for 3 days in Cheyenne, Wyoming. It was the wintertime. Anyway, the first thing I asked her when I saw her was, why did you break up with me? Oh, you didn't, no explanation? Or she said, well, she was running around with some bad people, and she didn't want me to get involved with them, So she thought she ought to break up with me, but didn't know how to break up. So she just said goodbye. Well, I thought she'd run around with those Hollywood people, and they were I ran around with some myself, and they weren't quite that wild, but they were a little wild, but no, I didn't think they were bad. Well, then a few years later, well, we did get married, and we got divorced, and after I was divorced, I went to a movie. It was called Bugsy. You know who I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Bugsy the Seagull.
Right.
That who the bad people were.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, wow. I thought, maybe the things worked out for the best.
I guess so. That was the one with Warren Beatty in it, right? He played Bugsy.
Yeah, maybe that's who it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a killer. He didn't mess around. Yeah, she told stories about it, you know, about this guy. He said at a party, you know, that she didn't drink or smoke, and at one of the parties that she thought it was time to go home, so she asked Bugsy, she said, somebody take her home. She said this, of course she didn't call him Bugsy. She said, this guy's told this other man, says, you make sure she gets home or I'll kill you. She was sad and pressed her, but he probably meant it. She got home safe.
Okay. Did you ever have any children?
No.
Okay.
Didn't have it.
How did you and your crew ever get back together again to go to reunions together? Can you just tell that story, or?
Well, we started out, I wasn't really interested in, and I don't know who organized it, but they wanted to get our crew together. And that's where we met in, where was it? Oklahoma. Oh Lord, just our crew. Where the heck was that? Was it in Texas? Anyway, we went over to the air base where the 20th Bombardment Squadron was still operating, but that wasn't in Louisiana, though. It was, gosh, was that
it was in Texas somewhere, I think.
Was it? Oh, Fort Worth.
Okay.
Yeah, we met in Dallas. Yeah, we met in, I guess it was Fort Worth where we met, and then we went over to the air base and met with these guys that were flying B-52. Was that B-52s then? Yeah, I guess it
I
would
think
have
so.
been
Yeah.
B-52s.
What was it like talking to those guys?
Oh, it was wonderful. Yeah, we were all impressed. Well, of course, they're all younger guys, you know,
Yeah.
we were older fellas, and we felt good about it. We felt that really, boy, our squadron's left in good hands.
Were they interested in talking to you?
Yeah, this is surprising. Yeah, they didn't know anything about their part of their history.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I don't know today if they know, but at that time they were interested. Yeah, we had this room and the guys that were hanging in the hallway listening in.
Wow.
Yeah.
How many reunions did you go to? Do you remember? More?
Yeah, well, then after that, I went to two second bombardment group, and that's where the guys kept asking me, "Oh, you flew, you were my navigator."
Yeah.
Now I know it's too late, but
Right.
I understand.
Now you never, some of your crew you never got to see again, right? I mean, even at the reunions, they.
No. Oh, of course, the one was. I did. No, I wasn't there when our tail gunner was killed, but I'd met his parents in training. And they were successful farmers in Indiana, Columbus, Indiana. And when I got out of the service, I was changing trains, well, in Chicago to come to Lansing. And instead of, when I got to Chicago, I thought I'd go down and see our tail gunner's parents. So I went down to see them. And, at the train station, I'm going to Columbus, Indiana. The porter comes by and says, "All aboard for Columbus, Ohio." And I said, "Hey, I'm going to Columbus, Indiana." He says, "Oh, that's that train over there. You better." I had to really run to get the right train. But I stayed 5 days with the parents. 4 nights. And that's when I learned that, well, I told them what happened. They never knew for sure. And I could give them details. Now, the only detail I lied about was his death. I said he died instantly. He didn't. He lived gurgling up blood, you know, and everything. I didn't tell them that, but I told them. But other than that, you know, they wanted to know. And well, I had learned this earlier, that people want to know what happened. In the Lansing State Journal, the newspaper, the other day there was an article about the recovering of World War II remains of someone and how happy, now the parents are gone now,
Right.
but the brothers and so forth are still living. And to me, they finally got closure.
Right.
I thought up to this point they must have, but no.
No.
No, after all these years. And it impressed me. A quick story is that I have a list of, I call them close calls from personal, then close calls from just being in an airplane. Well, my first close calls, I said, was personal, was there are 3 buddies in cadets, and we did everything together. We got behind on flying, and it was a night mission, and I drew straws with this one buddy, and he won.
Okay.
He got to fly. Well, the plane crashed that night and everybody was killed. So I thought, well, I drew the right straw. I said, well, that's a close call.
Right.
But he had a girlfriend in Lansing. He went to that CTD training at Michigan State.
Okay.
He was from Oregon, his home. But he went to CTD and met this girl that was a nursing student in Lansing. So I knew her name, and then before I went overseas, well, this was of course later after I finished training and everything, I was home on leave, and I thought, I wonder if she knows what happened. And so she was in those days, nurses were trained by the hospital.
Okay.
So they had a dormitory next to St. Lawrence Hospital where the nurses lived. And I went there. Of course, I was a guy.
Right.
In World War II, women peeking around the corners at you. A little embarrassing, but not bad. And so she came, and the only way she knew that something had happened is she knitted him a scarf. And it came back stamped deceased. And that's all she knew. So she was really pleased to know, you know, that how he was killed. I guess, again, we call it closure.
Right.
And that was my first time that I realized that people want to know. Regardless of how bad it is, they want to know.
Yeah. Now, if you had to say something to the youth growing up today about your experiences, what would it be?
I do talk to high school kids, boys, and sometimes I wonder if that's where I've got that list of close calls. I do have some flak that I hand around to see what that looks like. I almost brought some. I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't.
Oh, I should have brought some. I picked it up I wished I'd picked up more souvenirs like that now. But I had the piece they took out of me actually was stolen by a cab driver in Chicago.
Really?
I had a little box. Well, I won't get into details, but he's the guy that got it out of my suitcase. But I have a couple other pieces I picked up, and I wish I'd picked up more. You know, that they'd hit something in the airplane and maybe fall on the floor. Anyway, I have just two little pieces. And I show those to the boys, and I try to generalize sometimes about the war, you know, because they don't know that much about it.
Yeah.
Now these boys are homeschooled, so they get a little bit more. Out of 20 boys, 19 were homeschooled. That was 2 years ago. This year, I don't know how many. They're like the Boy Scouts, but they're a little more religious and want their father's-son relationship to be closer. No girls allowed.
Do they get a good foundation of history in homeschooling?
You know, this is something I want to kind of get to about World War II, how much they have. Some of them the boys get really interested, and others, you know, well, they aren't that interested. But I think they get more than they do in the public school, though. Even maybe because their fathers generally attend these things, and they're the ones that are a little more interested. Of course, a lot of those are Vietnam guys, you know, too.
Yeah.
Or their grandfathers were, maybe.
I remember when my son was going through high school, and history for World War II was like a page in the history book. You know, it wasn't much. So.
But I think they might, well, the close calls, I say, like, oh, the one time there were 30 holes right around me and none of them hit me. Oh, one time in this book, McGuire talks about a piece of flak coming up through my table.
Yes.
You know, well, that happened twice. It didn't happen just once. It happened twice, almost identical. Just blew up. Oh, one time I was talking to a navigator. He said, "Gee," he said, "I flew an airplane today and it had a hole right in the navigator's table." I said, "Oh yeah," I said, "I was there when the hole was put there." But it happened in two different times, so almost identical. But I talk about to the boys airplanes, the close calls with an airplane, and I think they understand that a little more. Like, well, there are a number. Well, the first close call was in Ardmore, Oklahoma. We got in the prop wash of the plane in front of us, and there was woods at the end of the runway, and we scraped the trees. When we came back, when we landed, there was still part of the tree on the undercarriage. Well, I call, well, that's being in an airplane. It can happen.
Yeah.
But the one time, two planes in front of us collided, and one plane cut the other one right in half. And that half of an airplane came floating by us, and I saw it, a whole half of a B-17, and it missed us by, I thought it was inches. Maybe it was a foot, but it was awful close.
Was that overseas, or was that?
That was over the target.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're packed in a little closer, you know, going over the target. And,
right. That's a defensive formation, right?
Yeah. But yeah, one thing I talked about, you're diving down on your oxygen system. Well, another thing is that several times we had a fire in the engine. Well, you know, the flak would cut a fuel line, and then I guess it started a fire. Well, of course, they'd cut off the fuel, the line, the engineer or pilot would. But you got a fire, you got to put it out. Well, they had fire extinguishers, but that doesn't mean they work all the time. So what do? You got an engine fire, well, you got to put the fire out. So you put the airplane in a dive and blow it out. And we did that before. And again, what mission it was, I don't have the whole story. These
right.
things happened. And so that's another way you get to low altitude in a hurry, is putting the fire out.
Did you keep a diary?
I did, primarily to count my missions. I wanted to make sure I had those right. But then once in a while I'd put something in. But it wasn't, I wish now I had more. Like when I say, I think there was like 6 times we came back alone. Oh, then of course the one time I remember that because the pilot, you know, we wanted to hide as much as possible, so he'd see a cloud blank. Over there, as a navigator, I'm following where he's going to go. Then I have to recalculate, you know, until he saw another cloud, then go over there. Well, just to hide,
Right.
you know. But we never were attacked by a fighter plane when we were coming back alone. Now, I know there were two of the times I remember they had to be separate because the one time the pilot, like if you have an engine, well, if you have two engines out, then you got problems.
Right.
It depends on which ones they are, too. But we had trouble keeping altitude. Well, of course, we're down. We couldn't keep up with formation. And so the pilot said, throw everything out. And I remember the bombardier, he kept saying, should I throw out the bomb sight? And the pilot said, hell yes. You know, so the Norden bomb sight went out. But another time, no, it was different. When we were coming back alone and throwing everything out, because they dismantled the ball turret. Because I think it took them about a half an hour to get that thing dismantled and dropped.
Oh, jeez.
So I knew that was two different times that we threw things out that came back alone. But then there were other times I remember. Well, the one time twice I felt real proud of whatever. The one time was my regular crew. The other time I wasn't sure of. We lost an engine before we got to the target, which generally you drop out of formation, which we couldn't keep up with formation. So instead of turning around and going home, we said, well, we're here, we might just as well bomb. So we bombed as a single airplane. And I don't think, as a rule, that's the smartest thing to do. But I felt proud of the guys that we did that. Then also, we bombed, maybe it was Munich, but we weren't too far from Switzerland. Switzerland was neutral.
Right.
And we knew that you could, if you had to, you could go to Switzerland. Well, we were shot up pretty bad, coming back by ourselves. And probably 3 engines. Again, I don't remember. But what I remember is that, well, as a navigator, we weren't too far, maybe a couple hundred miles from Switzerland. And we had to go over, though, to get home. We had to go over the Italian Alps. And we weren't sure we could get the altitude. And of course, as navigator, I was figuring the heights, and the engineer and pilot were figuring, boy, can we keep the altitude? And so what the pilot did, he took a vote to see if we'd try to get back or go to Switzerland. And in fact, the last guy on our crew I'd talk with knew all about this. And one day I asked him, hey, do you remember that time we took a vote, you know, whether to go to Switzerland or to try to get back? He says, yeah, he says, I was the only one to vote to go to Switzerland. Well, that corrected me because I thought we all voted to try to get back, which in hindsight was stupid because we risked our lives to get back so we could risk our lives some more. So it didn't make sense, you know, from a common sense. But as I recall, though, what the pilot did, he did not over the mountains, he went, followed the valleys through.
Okay.
And we got back all right. But I felt proud of our crew, you know, that we're here to fight, and by gosh, we're going to fight.
Well, Wayne, I don't have any more questions. It's been really a pleasure talking to you.
Well, I
Thank
can
you.
go on and on. This is because I don't have that single story, you know, that I can tell.
Well, you've got plenty of stories.
But they're little ones, you know, and they, well, like McGuire might have mentioned this in his book, that over Yugoslavia, you know, there were the three.
Yes.
Three factions. Well, the partisans, there were 2 of them that were pro-American, and the one was pro-Nazi, and they were meant for real rough torture. I mean,
Right.
these are intelligence reports we'd get. So McGuire may be in his book, and I did the same thing. I carried my .45 with me, and he did too. And he figured that if he had to parachute out in the Ustashis,
Yes.
if they captured him, he would use all his bullets except the last one, and that'd be for himself.
Right.
Of the torture, that it was bad. I felt the same way though too. I thought, well, you know, no messing around. I could go on, yeah.
Okay.
We better.
Well, thank you, Wayne. I
Oh, you're
appreciate-
welcome. Hey, I did this once before. I talked for a whole hour. They used 5 minutes. It was on a video they were making.
Well,
But there were some other guys on though too, and they made like a half-hour program. Historical Society was doing it, which is.
well, we'll use the whole video.
That was you don't know the guy. It was Gus Kanakis. You wouldn't know him. Well, he coached Michigan State basketball one year. Or for a while, and he was on the radio, sports announcer and stuff. He was a Marine, and he was coming in after me. The last statement I made was, in this one book, they said, if you want to survive, I'm quoting out of a book, and I made that clear. I said, if you want to survive, out of the book says this, World War II, you were better off in the Marine Corps than you were flying bombers over Europe. And here's a Marine that's coming, and okay, that's the end of it, like we had stopped. And he says, you have to be careful what you say. I was a Marine, you know. I say, hey, I quoted out of a book. You know, maybe it's true, maybe it wasn't, but they're kind of going by statistics. What was it, like 50,000 casualties?
Yes.
Or something over Europe?
Yes, 50,000 airmen were killed. But I believe that figure includes the British.
I don't know, what's the definition, you know, of all these things? What's a casualty? Is a casualty, am I a casualty? Is a wound? If you're a prisoner of war, are you a casualty?
I believe that 50,000 number is dead.
Is that?
That's just deaths. Doesn't include wounded.
Yeah.
So it was a hazardous business.
Yeah. Hey, well, thanks for the questions. You didn't you get me started.
World War II veteran, navigator. John Rue is a commercial airline pilot veteran and B-17 pilot.
Never been shot at. I've never been shot at in an airplane, so that's not the same. What you would do.
Do commercial.
Yeah. No, that's why it is.
What carried commercial?
Yeah. Well, he's a test pilot.
But he flew commercial.
Yeah.
We feel like we're flying this all the time. We're test pilots.
Well, it was interesting. I didn't realize everything was so confined. I don't know, a lot of room. That's the thing that surprised me when I got in there. I thought, holy cow. I couldn't remember it being so confined.
It's pretty little.
Well, these were good airplanes.
Where did you fly out of?
I was in the 15th.
Oh, down south in the heel there somewhere.
Yeah, well, Foggia was the main bearing of Foggia. Well, I was 20 miles from Foggia. It was loaded with Air Force, that whole area.
Yeah, I think the general was with the 365th.
I don't know.
He was flying, the guy who started our flying program.
Yeah.
He was down there flying B-24s.
Oh, yeah, they were primarily the 15th or B-24s. Like the 8th Air Force out of England was primarily 17s with some 24s. Just the opposite in the middle. 24s with a few 17s. Well, the 24s, I think they started the 15th Air Force out of Africa. And of course, their distance meant more than it did later. You know, they had to fly across another terrain to get to the activity.
Sure.
And after that, I don't know why they primarily 24s there. I thought that had a bearing on it.
It could have.
You know, I've flown a 24 a little bit, and boy, what a handful to keep going straight and level compared to this thing.
You know, yes. I flew on one once, just to get home from the bases. I looked out in those wings. I thought, they ought to flap a little faster if we're going to keep flying. they flapped, but I thought they weren't flapping quite fast enough. Oh Lord, you know, I felt uneasy in the 24. You know, it just didn't seem that sturdy. And I've heard stories about, you know, formation flying and stuff. You really had to work that.
We've taken our hands off that yoke for as much as 20 minutes. And if people weren't moving around the airplane going somewhere, and it just stayed a little bit of rudder to keep it on track, but otherwise, trim it, and it's really a nice flying airplane. Actually. Very nice flying
Yeah.
airplane. We love it. Museum loves it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice. What commercial are you running?
You know, I am Delta. I went through the line of Republic Northwest, Delta, actually North Central, Republic Northwest, and then Delta got both. I retired from Delta. Lesher.
I remember when I first came out to HDX, I was talking to a commercial pilot, and I asked him about it. Well, do you have that on a commercial plane? No, he said, but I got a private plane. I got it on a private plane. I thought, no, private planes don't GPS on. They hadn't got it to the commercial.
Yeah, well, you know, I was flying a little corporate jet at one time, and they didn't have to make a living with that tool. So they had GPSs and stuff when the airlines didn't. You know, the airlines had to make a living, you know, so they kept their costs down. But nowadays, with the satellites and everything, the airplane I was flying, you can take off, push a button, and it'll land itself anywhere in the world and stop in the middle of the runway by itself.
Amazing. That is
So now you're connected there then?
Well, I'm actually the director of flight operations for the flyables, and then I fly this quite a bit.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Now, is everything pretty much the way original? Well, I know you got pretty much seats.
You know, we upgraded, they upgraded the whole flight instrument panel so that we have much more redundancy and make it safe to operate in our current environment. You know.
One time, I thought the pilot, well, as a navigator, my instruments are all destroyed. And I thought the pilots were too, but he had still had the old-fashioned
His compass.
yeah, the
It's
compass.
magnetic.
I'm trying to say thermometer. That doesn't sound right. That's the problem with old age. I know all these words, but I got to get them to the right place. Yeah, is it? Did they have the old-fashioned one as a pilot, or is this something I thought, well, maybe that's an imagination. But I was calling up the pilot to find out what is compass red? Because mine would blow out. And I thought the only thing he had was the old magnetic compass, where my kind of screwed up.
Well, you know, he had a whiskey compass up there with taking certain things into effect would give you a good heading, but he did have an HSI in front of him. Actually, the instruments were a little bit more towards the center, so they both, because they only had one set. And the artificial horizon, I know, is right in the middle. And so the Popal can fly off it also. Where here we have one whole set's driven by air and one whole set's driven by electric. So we have redundancy to operate safely in our environment.
Well, did they have that then?
No, they did not.
Okay.
We did a movie with this, and I had to put a chart up in front of there so if people saw it, they wouldn't go. And then the chart was up to date, so I mean, it was at a, you know, they didn't have charts like that in the old days, but maybe people would miss some things. There's a lot of things that happen in the movies. You go, yeah, right.
You know, the one thing, you may fly this, but you say, if you ask me, do I want to go for a ride? I'd have to say, thank you, but no thanks.
A lot of people say that, don't want to get back in them. It had to be a horrifying experience to actually do it, you know?
Well, at first it's kind of fun, and after a few times, it's a job that you had to do.
Losing buddies.
Well, it's nice that you're here. You're flying like you.
My father was a World War II pilot, and that's how I got involved with this. Was looking up his history at one time, and I was talking to some people about it. He said, "Why don't you come do this?" You gotta be kidding. So
What did your dad fly?
he flew gliders in C-47. He flew the glider in the Market Garden over Europe, up north there, and he flew in Sicily. So he was in northern Africa. He went over in the fall of 41, maybe 42, and I see by his letters that he was come home see my mom in 6 months. Well, he came home in September of 45, so it was many 6 months later. You know, the guys.
You know, of course, this is the thing that people don't realize it unless you really think about it. The first prisoner of war the Germans had with Americans were the flyers. You know, but for Harmony, there was 6 months, it'd be over a year, it wouldn't have been a year and a half or so, before they started getting infantry prisoners. Up to that point, they were all Airforce people.
Plus, there weren't there volunteers that were going over to England before the U.S. got into the war. The volunteer airmen that were actually going over joining the Royal Air Force. You got over there beforehand.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I had a few drinks with one of those guys to get to know them. But, yeah, it was a mixture of guys. They were all Air Force guys. Well, this was everybody's on leave. So you get into the community, sailors today, I assume, you get into the town, you're not familiar with the town, you ask the cab driver, where's the action? Well, you want to go so-and-so. So you get in the road, same thing. Ask the road, not taxi drivers, whatever they were. Hey, where's the action? Oh, Broadway Bills. So you end up with Broadway Bills. I mean, and this is where, like I say, the Tuskegee Airmen, that's where I ran into him, and we had a few drinks together. Same thing with these guys from England. One guy was from Canada that joined before he wanted the action.
Yeah.
Well, no, he was an American who went to Canada. That was it. So your dad was the C-47.
Yeah, and then he came back and went to airlines. And then every time he went to United. Actually went to Capital Airlines first, and they merged in the early 60s with United. I'm from the merger family. You got a bunch of pilots and everybody started in little airlines and ended up big ones through merger. But the one thing that's awful noticeable to me about the Greatest Generation is their values. You know, they were working hand over fist just to feed families, protect their nation and stuff. And now this day and age, there's a lot of, I don't know what's going on.
Because I don't,
You know?
I don't like this. My generation, I feel much more that my parents' generation were much more greater than mine. Because they went through World War I as fighters. My dad didn't. He was forever. But my uncles did in World War I. And then these people had kids, like me, so they saw their kids go through it. And to me, they saw a lot more than what they call my generation was the greatest. I think of my parents, well, the Depression years, you know, the whole shebang they went through. And that wasn't my generation, that was the generation before.
Mm-hmm.
So, don't call I disagree, but most people don't think about that.
Well, we look back and see the things that were done, you know. Interesting comment. Good comment.
Yeah.
Makes you think.
Well,
Well, I suppose we got things to do. What are we doing?
Did you want to walk around it and take a look? Or are you good?
Yeah, one of my things, when I look at the 25, holy cow, I'm going to do it was that big. You know, then I see this thing. I mean, really? I mean, people say, oh, that's small. Well, yeah, small compared to other things, but when I look here and think of it, holy cow, this is unbelievable.
well, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Here.
Here, I'll do this. Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice
Thank
talking to
you.
you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, good luck on your hard work.
Oh, well, it's about you folks. You have anything for your father? The Waco might be pretty old. The initial design is 515. Yeah, and now the people have a lot of things, a lot of material things, and I think they haven't learned yet what your dad had to live off of, you know? And then, interesting.
So what do you remember now? A lot more room up
Well,
there,
of course,
wasn't there?
I had a chair here.
There is one there. It's actually tucked underneath the desk.
Oh. But there was a drift meter somewhere. Maybe this is it. Well, that guy that was wounded, I thought he was right. He must have been there.
Yeah.
They had him.
This is probably, besides the waist,
You
this
know,
probably wake up the most room.
Well, what's interesting is everything's different than what I remember.
It's funny how memories can actually work.
Yeah.
They can drift.
It's a lot more confining than I ever remember.
Yeah. Well, think about going back to elementary school.
Yeah.
Things look a lot bigger, more smaller.
So that's the old table where the old Flak came through right through there.
Yeah.
Then it came through there again. Another time, well, there were handles. There were some handles up here. machine guns are there. Yeah, to me, I remember the machine guns closer, but maybe this one is. I don't know. Yeah, that's what surprises me, how close this is together. I think of it, a lot more room.
There's probably less room when you guys were in it with all your gear and
Ammunition.
ammo and yeah.
They're wearing parachutes. Well, the suits at least, not the parachutes.
Your suits, your parachutes, your flak jacket, your helmet, oxygen mat. I mean, yeah, this is. I mean, it's got some of the stuff in it, but they also, you know, they got to make room for people to fly on it to give them rides too. So
Yeah, you figure you're going to have all your ammo cans stored all over the place.
yeah.
Well, I think I see why I always entered through the hatch here
Yeah.
rather than going through that bomb bay.
Right.
Yes.
No, there's stories why I'm interested in that bomb bay. Because this one guy got the Silver Star for standing there and beating on the bombs.
Get the bombs to drop.
Yeah, and I remember twice. Well, I remember at least twice. Because I remember the story behind each time where the bomb was banged up. And the guys, I thought it was just part of their job. So this guy gets the Silver Star
Gets a
for
medal.
doing it.
Where's
So
your-
I had a chair right here and
Well, tell you what,
that's,
this chair comes out. There's probably a locking mechanism right there. I think.
no, that's all right. So that's it.
Yep.
When it came in and out.
Yes. There's a handle right here that you can release the seat and it comes out the rest of the way.
Take a seat.
Sit down. Okay, bombs away, bombardier. Let's go.
As long as you got them on course.
Well, I can't. This one book tells about the navigator laying on the floor, and I figured that must have been me.
Well, if you're going to
It
get
wouldn't have
hit,
been. Yeah, I suppose
that's where you would end up.
I got thrown back. Yeah, could have happened. Okay.
Hey Wayne, hold on. Just look at my phone. I'm just gonna take a picture. There.
I gotta look at that.
Watch your head.
Okay, so those props are really behind me a little bit.
Just a touch.
Because I was thinking, when the one unscrewed and flew off.
So you got a prop come detached?
Yeah, I figured. Well, it was. You know, they couldn't feather,
Right.
and the thing just before we landed, the thing started windmailing. So I guess when it windmailed, it unscrewed,
It came apart on
and it flew off another direction. And I always thought, well, there it goes. But I never thought it could come this way too.
Could have gone any direction.
Yeah, but I always thought the other way. I thought, geez, that would. But then I got thinking, well, that's lined up for the navigator, but it isn't. No, it's lined up till it hit the pilot more.
Well,
Poor guy.
yeah.
Well, let's.
Tell you what, maybe get out.
Well,
You want to slide that in?
yeah, I was trying to push it back. Oh,
Let's handle.
well, maybe it's all right the way it is.
Well, it won't move, but I'm just trying to figure out how to release the anchor from this angle. I know they can.
Well, that's one of those walking on bombs, so.
No, it's a fire extinguisher.
Oh, that's a fire
yeah.
extinguisher.
Yeah.
Required by today's standards.
Oh,
There's your extinguisher.
All right.
oh,
That's what
Well,
you guys have.
we can have them put that back.
yeah.
want to come out this way? Or you want to go for the back? There's a ladder right here. I'm sitting on it, so.
Yeah, well, I just soon if I can make it. Maybe I can't make it.
I'll leave that up to you, but we probably should have somebody in front of him if he does.
Wayne, if you want to go to the back, let me go first.
Okay. Yeah, let's try that and see if I get another look. That's what I'm thinking about.
What I'll do is I'll
Here, why don't you come over here?
hold you guys all the way through the cockpit there. Let you get it back on the mountain on the other side.
Sure. Just keep watching your head so you don't hit it on stuff.
Oh boy, this is a pretty good tour.